In yet another show of flailing desperation, exaggeration at best, and outright lies at worst, Joe Biden hobbled out to the podium on Monday to preempt the coming news that everybody cares about, yet another month of record inflation, to make an announcement on an issue that nobody cares about: stricter gun control. And don't take my word for it, read the polling. Over the last 4 months, the rate of Gallup poll respondents rating guns and gun control as the most important issue facing the country fluctuates between 0 and 1%. And that's people on both sides of the issue, mind you. That number includes people who think too much gun control is the number one issue facing the country. Some might dismiss that perspective as fringe, but it isn't. At the end of March, respondents in a Politico Morning Consult poll said they trust Republicans to handle guns better than Democrats by a 7-point margin. One would assume more gun control isn't on the wish list of that plurality. So even though more gun control is the priority of effectively nobody, Biden hosts this event to pretend that it is, but the implications of what he said go far beyond just the gun issue itself. If we don't pay attention, it's easy to dismiss this event as just some policy change on some fringe type of gun that doesn't really matter anyway. But as usual, as we'll get to, the lies that he told and the principles that he trashed go well beyond just some obscure technical gun issue. It was once again a demonstration of a rabid federal thirst to encroach on your constitutional rights in any way that they can. In addition to announcing a new nominee for ATF director after his last one failed miserably, or AFT director, as Biden repeated several times Monday.
Dedicated men and women of the AFT, and including AFT agents.
Monday's event was an announcement on new policy to ban the manufacture and sale of so-called ghost guns, more precisely, to ban the manufacture and sale of parts kits without serial numbers. Like assault weapon, ghost gun is just a propaganda term to make it sound scary. It refers to a homemade firearm. Americans have always enjoyed the right to make their own guns for personal use. That was legal at the founding. Despite the mountain of federal law written since, it remains legal today. If you make guns to sell to others, federal law requires those guns to have a serial number imprinted on them. But if you build your own for your own use, there's no sale, there's no transfer, that's just you making your own gun, as has always been your right. So what Biden is targeting is the sale of parts. If you buy a plastic frame that requires drilling to install a trigger pack before other necessary parts, you've manufactured a gun yourself. As a matter of law, up until Monday, you haven't purchased a gun in that scenario, you have built one. Biden did his usual old man yelling routine in demonstration.
Take a look. This is the gun. It's not hard to put together. A little drill, hand drill at home. Anyone can order it.
Yeah, anyone can order it because those are just pieces of plastic and metal. Any standard otherwise would be a nonsense world in which buying certain shapes of plastic is illegal or otherwise heavily regulated, but gun-shaped things are not guns. Only guns are guns, but Biden says buying pieces that are too close in shape is the same thing.
If you buy a couch you have to assemble, it's still a couch.
Well, is fabric a couch? Is cushion filling a couch? Is the internal frame a couch? Or does it only become a couch when constructive labor is applied? Put another way, were the 2x4 studs in your house a house while they were still stacked at the lumber yard? Or did they only become a house when somebody cut them up and nailed them together and built the house? And should the regulations that apply to building a house apply to the builder or to the acquisition of the 2x4s? If it's not a gun until you manufacture it into one, then it's not a gun by the letter of the law, and therefore no background check required to buy pieces and no serial number required for the end product, as long as you keep it for yourself and don't transfer it to another person. But all of that is only part of the lies and confusion that Biden is spreading here. He claims that criminals are assembling these ghost guns in massive quantities, as we'll get to. That's an unsubstantiated claim, but even if true, that's already a crime. If you're a felon or an otherwise prohibited person under federal law, you can't build one of these ghost guns. Just like you can't buy a gun because you can't possess a gun. Anyone who does that is breaking existing federal law. But Biden tells you just one more law stacked on top of the massive existing ones will finally fix this problem. Or one more regulation, one more decree, more accurately, because what he's doing is not a change in the law. The policy change he's announcing is executive action to redefine these parts as guns, though they are not. They are pieces of plastic and metal that require machining, as in manufacture, to become guns. The Justice Department describes that as a loophole. It is not. It is the letter of the law. They just don't like the law. So now they're rewriting the law by executive fiat, not congressional act, all while insisting that a legal right you have always had is somehow a new anomaly. But the actual anomaly is their entire premise. They claim that these homemade firearms are behind a huge number of crimes.
Our nation's epidemic of gun violence has been driven by the proliferation, of guns in our communities, and increasingly in recent years by the proliferation of ghost guns.
Even if we take that point at its absolute best, with the highest available numbers, there is no plausible way to say that ghost guns are driving crime rates. In Chicago in recent years, unserialized guns were about 1% of the total guns confiscated from involvement in crime, about 100 in the context of over 10,000 annually. Similar numbers in Philadelphia, roughly 2% of the guns confiscated unserialized. And I use the term unserialized gun instead of ghost gun intentionally. One, because those aren't necessarily the same thing, and two, because Biden conflates them. He says tens of thousands of ghost guns are being confiscated in crimes nationally.
Law enforcement reported approximately 20,000 suspected ghost guns to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
But the Justice Department numbers he's citing aren't quite so certain. That report mentions, quote, unserialized firearms recovered by law enforcement. There is no distinction made as to why these firearms lack serial numbers. They could be home builds, or, as is a very common occurrence, it could be criminals simply filing off the serial numbers from guns that did have them previously, which itself is a crime. And it's highly likely that explains a huge portion of the stats that Biden is citing, considering the Justice Department also acknowledges that almost half the guns recovered in crime are purchased on the black market. Very rarely are these actually manufactured at home. So Joe stretches the law and the facts to try to get you to believe that, one, making your own gun is somehow a violation of the law. It is not, and it never has been. And two, that these homemade guns somehow explain increasing crime rates. They do not, at least in any statistically significant sense. And that's just the opener for the feature presentation, which is, of course, all his greatest hit, gun lies. We gotta ban assault weapons, and if you think otherwise, well, that's just because you're a terrible shot at the deer.
And the guy standing there said, "You want to take my gun?" I said, "I don't take your gun." He said, "Well, you're telling me I can't have more than the next number of bullets in my gun." And I said, "What do you think, the deer you're hunting or wear Kevlar vests? What the hell you need 20 bullets for? You must be a hell of a terrible shot." I'm serious. Think about it. Think about the mass shootings. As many as 100 rounds. It's a weapon of war. There's nothing to do with recreation.
Well, at least he's accidentally correct on that one. It does have nothing to do with recreation. Because the Second Amendment has nothing to do with recreation. The Second Amendment is about war. It's about protecting yourself within its context. When a war is declared on your rights, a weapon of war is needed to defend them. That's why the Second Amendment was written. And that philosophy isn't just about domestic threats, by the way. It's about foreign ones, too. If these weapons have absolutely no practicality or reasonability, then why is Joe sending thousands of them to Ukraine on your dime, often destined for civilian hands? If these things have no reasonable use, what makes their use reasonable over there? And why couldn't similar circumstances ever happen here? I guess they're very reasonable for people that he likes. They're just not reasonable for you. And this recycled monologue of lies continues. Joe says that gun manufacturers enjoy legal immunity that nobody else does.
Eliminate gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. They're the only outfit in the country that is immune. Imagine had the tobacco industry been immune to being sued. Come on.
Well, he is right about that. Immunity from prostitution definitely would cut into cigarette company profits. That's a huge market for them. But this is also untrue. Just like any product, if a gun is defective, then the manufacturer can be held liable. But you don't get to sue the gun company if someone uses a gun in a crime against you, any more than you get to sue Ford if someone drunk drives a Bronco into your house. He says that gun manufacturers enjoy some special legal immunity that nobody else does. In fact, it's the opposite. It's that he wants to assign a special legal liability that nobody else is responsible for, as though if someone stabs you, it's the knife company's fault. Lastly, Joe moved on to the biggest, most preposterous lie of them all, that he supports the Second Amendment, as demonstrated by his favorite historical fairy tale.
And by the way, it's going to sound bizarre. I support the Second Amendment. You have a right. But from the very beginning, the Second Amendment didn't say you can own any gun you want, as big as you want. You couldn't buy a cannon when, in fact, the Second Amendment passed.
Yeah, it's going to sound bizarre, but I actually support the Constitution. Was it bizarre when you swore an oath to uphold it? What's actually bizarre is not meaning it when you did and experiencing no consequences for that. Also bizarre is his commitment to this completely made-up historical revision. He keeps repeating this canon lie. Even the Washington Post gave it a 4 Pinocchio rating last year. Private cannon ownership was common at the founding. In fact, the Constitution implicitly endorses it. There's a specific constitutional clause that gives Congress the power to hire private ships to act as pirates for the government in times of war. And these warships had what? Privately owned cannons. And actually, we don't even need a history lesson. Regardless of that history, it is still perfectly legal to own cannons today. In fact, black powder muzzle loaders aren't even considered guns or destructive devices under federal law, which means you can have one without a background check or a serial number. But I assume Biden's crackdown on ghost cannons is coming very soon. But even though all of these claims are nowhere near true, there are still a lot of people who might think, so what? Who cares? I don't care about cannons. I'm part of most in the polling who don't even care about guns. There are way more important, more pressing issues that the country is facing. Why should I care about these obscure lies? Here's why we should care. Beyond the gun issue, these lies are packaged in a philosophy that wants to crinkle up the Constitution and dunk it in the trash. Biden is right that it is bizarre that he'd say that he supports your rights, because all of his other commentary clearly demonstrates otherwise. He says that if he puts you on a terrorist watch list, your constitutional rights should be void.
Is it extreme to protect police officers? Extreme to protect our children? Extreme to keep guns out of the hands of people who couldn't even pass a background check? Look, the idea that someone on a terrorist list could purchase one of these guns. It isn't extreme, just basic common sense.
Well, it is extreme to deny fundamental rights without due process of law. Yes, that's why we have 2 amendments against it. Even if you don't care at all about guns, that's Joe saying he will revoke your rights arbitrarily, not because you've been convicted of any crime, but just because he doesn't like you. That is as anti-Constitution extreme as it gets. And here's a crucial point. Even if you disagree with my analysis or with current law on this issue, and you do think that we should treat gun parts as guns and apply the same rules to their sale and transfer, great. I don't agree with that position because I think we'll just be saying that certain shapes of plastic or metal are illegal. It'll be undefinable and untenable. But if you want to try it, we should at least agree that there's a process for that. Current federal law defines what a gun is, and it is not simply a piece of plastic in a shape close to a gun. But if we want to change it to piece of plastic of a certain shape, we can do that by Congress passing a law. And I actually think it's a little more complicated than that because, well, shall not be infringed and all, but we can agree that as a general rule, Congress makes law where it has jurisdiction. But that is not what is happening here. Instead, the Justice Department is usurping Congress's role and just redefining the definitions in the law themselves. And Joe endorses this unconstitutional process, saying, well, I can't get it through Congress, so I'll just change the law myself.
I instructed the Attorney General to write a regulation that would rein in the proliferation of ghost guns because I was having trouble getting anything passed in the Congress. But I used what we call regulatory authority.
You don't have to be a gun guy to see the huge problems here. Changing the law through executive fiat, chomping to revoke your rights through executive fiat, disregarding the process to change the law without ever even seriously trying to use it, treating it as an obstacle rather than an obligation. The real ghost here is the Constitution. The real murderer is Joe Biden. And while, of course, crime is important to stop and to bring to justice, it's hard to think of a single killing more consequential than that of our foundational framework. We will always have disagreements on problems and solutions. When we can't agree on the process to address them, though, peace is the inevitable casualty. It's going to sound bizarre, Joe, but the Constitution is not an impediment to prosperity. The rights it secures and the governmental process it outlines are the road straight to it. In fact, it is the clear route through the rest of history's landmines. So step off path at your own risk. But I guess the guy can't help it. I don't need to explain it in metaphors. This is a literal problem. In this context, as in every other, he's an old man aimlessly wandering from a path he can't stay on, even when it is plainly pointed out for him. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.